Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So for today's little drawing session, it's going to be kind of like a conglomerate of two different sessions, but we're going to do like a bunch of little illustrations today. So my plan was to initially do this all in Procreate, but you'll see that shortly I will abandon that idea and we will switch on over to Clip Studio Paint, because the thing that I had planned technically was to do an illustration with all of my current OCs and have them be dressed up in their kind of like Halloween costumes that I decided to put them in for this year. And the costumes are kind of like roughly based off of the ones that I did for my Inktober. So those would have been day 25 to day 30. So I wanted to instead kind of draw them all in kind of like a chibi format, because it'll be easier for me to include their entire outfit and their entire design rather than spending too much time doing full bodies for the actual like characters, I guess, or like doing headshots. So this is kind of my layout. I ended up only doing the composition and the formatting in Procreate so that I could roughly plan it out. Oftentimes I do this traditionally instead of like digitally, just because it's a little bit easier for me to see the entire picture. But after that, I ended up just like kind of planning out where their head locations were, and then I will switch on over to Clip Studio Paint. So in Clip Studio Paint, before we start working on the actual sketch, I decided to scale everything up significantly larger, so at least by double, I think. And the reason being is that I wanted to actually draw each individual chibi separately. So by the time that I finished drawing the illustration all together, I still wanted to have each of the OCs to have their own individual like drawing or illustration of their chibi form separately. Kind of like if I wanted to make stickers of them in the future for myself, then I will have that ability to do so rather than like collaging them, or I guess like the opposite, so not collaging them. So I decided to start off with Masaki. So for Masaki's outfit, or like his costume, I was kind of debating. I've drawn him as a vampire in the past, I think for 2 years, but I don't think it really fits him all that much. I end up using the vampire costume for another OC, which you'll see later. But for Masaki, I ended up picking a scarecrow for him, just because I think it's a little bit more fitting and the color palette was easier to kind of suit him to, if that makes sense. Next up, we have Akemi, which I started. I switched it over because I thought the pose fit better for Koji. So for Koji, I kept it kind of simple and went with the stereotypical mummy, which I feel like is usually like a fun costume for like younger kids and stuff, just because you get to just like wrap toilet paper or whatever around yourself. And I think from like previous years, like I mentioned for Masaki, I have drawn, I think, Koji in a pumpkin before. I think Masaki maybe as well. I've drawn Masaki as a witch as well, and I think Koji too. So I've only done really Halloween costumes for the both of them. So moving along to the characters that I haven't drawn for. And also, I usually don't use like the navigator that often, or like the second view focusing on one character. So I oftentimes will forget to switch over to the right character which I'm sketching. So for Akemi, I kept it simple with Frankenstein's monster, or a kind of like a mixture of that and a zombie, I guess. And then after Akemi, I went over to just above him, where I ended up drawing Kaisen. So Kaisen, I wanted him to be kind of like werewolf or wolf-esque, just because it's a little bit fitting. Otherwise, if I wanted to pick something slightly cuter, I would probably put him into like a cat costume or something, which I feel like a black cat fits him as well. Just like demeanor-wise, color palette, and all that. So just kind of to fit him. Also for the sketching, I am using the Froggy pencil just for ease. It's just very easy to lay down marks and to erase easily, so it's often fun for me to do it for sketching, especially if I know I'm going to do line art and color afterwards. But next up, we have my OC Moriko. So for hers, I ended up making her of a vampire. I just like the aesthetic and the idea of like slicking her hair back a little bit. She also tends to wear a lot of darker clothing, so it's easy for me to kind of like fix up her color palette to fit kind of that vampire aesthetic for the most part. Also, I don't know why I associate apples with vampires. I drew on it for my Inktober piece as well, so I gave it to Rico for this drawing too. But moving to the last chibi that I'm going to do, and this one was kind of fun because I ended up adding a little friend as well to Sato's. So for Sato, I had a hard time thinking on what I wanted her to be. I was kind of thinking like, would I do a couple outfit for Sato and Akemi together, but I decided to keep them separate, so Sato became a witch instead because I haven't drawn her as one quite yet. I would like to redesign her outfit though to be a little bit more extravagant, maybe in the future or next year. But the little guy hanging on the end of the broomstick is Hansuke, who is my like little green cat mascot that I don't draw too often anymore. But to talk a little bit more about the actual process, I mentioned earlier that I wanted to kind of draw each of the chibis separately. So you can kind of see on the left-hand side, I have a bunch of colorful folders, kind of like color coordinated with each of my OCs. So starting from the very bottom, we kind of have Masaki's color, then we have Koji, Akemi, Kaisen with the purple, then the green is Moriko, and kind of like the pink color is Sato. So I'm going to be starting from Masaki and moving my way up in the similar order to how I sketched them all out. And I did sketch them out like with different colors so that I could easily see which was which, and then we can see how they overlap a little bit later. But for the kind of like formatting of my folders and layers, so within my main folder, which is like the color coordinated ones, I will have a Lineart folder, and then I will have another folder for all the colors that will then be clipped onto a kind of like base color layer, which you'll see a little bit later. But right now I'm working on the Lineart. So to kind of keep things a little bit more on the simple and quick side, because I didn't want to run out of time doing these if I made them a little bit too detailed, I ended up going with the same style that I did for a lot of my recent kind of like chibi stickers, which tends to be a little bit of like thicker, very, I was gonna say like non-tapered lines, I guess. I'm using the Milli pen, which I feel like is like one of the easiest pens to use if you want very consistent line width. It has like barely any tapering or anything like that, so everything is nice and consistent. After that, I go ahead and select my lines, increase the selection by I think 10 pixels because my canvas is quite large, so I ended up increasing it twice, and that helps me get a nice black border around everything. And to kind of make sure I don't have any colors kind of go out of those black borders, I ended up making a color layer. And this color layer was just a solid gray, like the dark gray that you're kind of seeing on top of the lighter gray, which is my background color. So the dark gray is allowing everything else, like the skin tone, the hair color, his outfit, everything, all that is contained within the dark gray, because I have a extra folder that is clipped to that dark gray layer, and every subsequent color that I want to do to stay within that dark gray layer will be in that folder, which is clipped to the previous layer that I mentioned. So it kind of keeps everything nice and clean and kind of everything contained, which makes it a little bit easier for me to manage. And then for coloring, I tried my best not to use too many gradients. I ended up using a very subtle gradient for Masaki's shading just because I wanted to be a little bit darker. And then everything else is basically cell shading and me touching up some of the lines to make them a little bit softer for the overall look. I've been doing that kind of like method and style for my most recent chibis, especially like whenever I draw my OCs, just because if I do want to turn them into stickers, they're just very easily readable because everything is more or less very clean, a little bit more on the bolder side. But in the future, I will end up doing some maybe more detailed chibis again because they are fun to do, and I would like to do some that are a little bit more painted rather than like in a cell shaded kind of method. But for the coloring, so we did move on to Koji, and I think it might be a little bit easier for you to see like how I'm picking the shadow colors and stuff. So I do have a selection of colors that I like to use for my OCs. I am referring to some previous ones that I've done in the past just to make sure that I got their skin tone correct if I want them to be all consistent throughout. But I also keep like a color palette swatch in the upper right hand corner so that I can easily pick the colors. Also, his eyes look insane at the moment. I was debating whether or not I wanted to keep the eyes super simple or add another band of like reflective light in the upper portion of their iris, which I like to do when I digitally paint, or like if I'm doing any kind of inking and stuff, I tend to leave that area a little bit lighter just to make the eyes look a little bit shinier. But I ended up not really liking it, and there was not really a need for me to complicate everything, so I decided that I will just keep it with the simple blocky shaped eye instead. But for the shadows, I ended up doing all of the clothing all in one layer, and then we'll make a new layer, set a shadow color to be, in this case, I ended up being kind of like a warmish purple color, and I did turn that layer into a multiply layer so we can apply it all over the clothing, which makes everything a little bit easier. It also makes the palette a little bit more concise. Granted that the color doesn't always work with every color that I chose. I feel like if I wanted to make everything a little bit more cohesive, I would probably pick like a main color for the background and kind of like base everything off of that. So let's say if I wanted to add orange as the background color, then I could make everything a little bit warmer and have a more cohesive color palette that way. But because all these chibis are going to be kind of like standalone on their own later on, I didn't really care too much if they all matched or not, as long as like they're about the same size and they have the similar coloring style for the most part. So visually they're kind of all the same, but like color palette wise, they don't really match all together, I guess. So we have Masaki done, we have Koji done, and I am working on Akemi. So I do like keeping the gradients to a minimum, but I ended up doing a small little green gradient on his skin tone just because I wanted more of that zombie Frankenstein-esque kind of reference. So I thought it fit a little bit better. And then moving on, I went to do Kaisen's line work. So the area that I had a little bit more issues actually comes into when I end up doing the line art for Sato, because I did not sketch her out exactly how I wanted her to be, which I talked about this in the past, my gripe about line art sometimes, and I do think that when I'm in the mindset of wanting to do line art, I do skimp out a lot on details or refining things to the point where I feel like I need to give myself more information before I start inking. And I think Sato's case will be a good demonstration on where I did not plan everything correctly, and then I try to plan things while doing the line art, so I get very confused. And in the end, I kind of just do a compromise of just leaving it as is. And try to hopefully fix it with coloring and all that, which kind of gives me a very iffy look to her, I guess. It's not my favorite, which is kind of why I would like to redesign her a better costume or something in the future, or if I have time to squeeze another drawing before Halloween rolls around, then I will. But for Kaisen, I ended up making his outfit a lot more darker. I know wolves are like typically I guess like they're more like gray, they can be white, but I decided that I wanted to keep his color palette still very dark, but still have accents of like a slightly lighter gray compared to the rest of his color palette, just to make things not look too monochromatic per se. And then moving on to Moriko, I had a similar issue of not planning things a little bit correctly, so I did have a bit of a problem of positioning her hands. I do figure it out a little bit, but just don't look too hard. Otherwise, you'll probably be like, her hand doesn't make sense gripping the apple, nor does her outfit. So I needed to fix up a few lines here and there. But otherwise, I do like how Moriko's came out. I did have to pop out the Pokemon versions that I did for all of my OCs to pick some of the colors for them, because like I said, I want consistency. Though I want to fix Moriko's color palette a little bit, just because at least if I'm printing out my own stickers, her color palette almost reads completely black, and I can't see the difference between her pants color, her jacket color, and the line art in general, and sometimes her hair. So I might want to put a little bit more contrast between everything so that everything can read perfectly, at least like how the way I want it to. So I'll probably adjust her colors a little bit, and then we can have more like official colors to whenever I draw the chibis like this in the future, just for consistency's sake. Otherwise, I will just make up the colors on the go or on the spot, depending on whatever I'm working on. So last but not least, we are working on Sato. So like I mentioned, I did not have any strong opinions on what I wanted Sato to be for Halloween. I was going to potentially draw the girls into one costume and the guys into another costume. Would have been kind of fun because I could have drawn maybe Sato and Moriko as vampires and the boys as something else, like all of them are the zombies or like something like that. But because I did end up sketching them or doing them for Inktober, I thought it would just be more consistent if I drew the same thing for this year at least. And you guys can give me suggestions if you think there's a costume or something that you think fits a little bit better for them. Do let me know, because I picked very stereotypical type of Halloween costumes. They're like very classic ones that a lot of people tend to wear, but I did not want to pick any of the ones that have been sexualized to a certain point. Like I didn't want to pick like a maid or a nurse, unless it's like maid version for some of the dudes, but I kind of wanted to stray away from those. But I feel like these classic ones kind of worked out for all of my OCs for the most part. I think a ghost would have been fun to do, but it would be like a sheet on a person, so it was gonna be hard to identify who was in there. I'm trying to think what else would have been a good selection of other costumes other than like just generic ones, I guess, like firefighter, a policeman, that kind of stuff. But yeah, maybe I will do another like swap around of all of their costumes for next year, and we can do another illustration. But with Sato and Hansuke kind of done, I ended up putting them and arranging them so that none of them were overlapping too much. Put a white border around everybody alongside with making a little bit of a background, or not a background, I guess like I just put a border on a colored square, and then I ended up putting some text in the very center that says Happy Halloween. And I think that's pretty much it for what I do for the drawing for today. No, don't go quite yet. I do have one more little session at the very end, but I wanted to show you guys kind of like a close-up of all of the OCs and their costumes. I think they turned out pretty cute. I probably will end up printing them out so that I have them as stickers so that I can use them in the future, just because it's been kind of fun having themed stickers with all my OCs that I can have use for them in the future. So I'm just gonna stick them in my sticker book and maybe I'll find use for them. But for now, here are kind of like the overall look, and then their individual looks right here. So Masaki is a scarecrow, Koji is a mummy, wolf Kaisen, vampire Moriko, which Sato and kind of zombie or Frankenstein-esque Akemi. Now, before we end today's video, I have something lingering in my brain that I need to get out, so I'm going to be showing you this session. If you came to yesterday's live stream, you would know what I'm drawing here, but I ended up going back to Procreate and decided to doodle something, and I was technically not planning on doing this as an animation, but I ended up doing it anyways. So even though I'm pretty bad at doing animations, I think it's still pretty fun to do once you kind of commit and fully finish it. So right now we have Kaisen, and if you can't tell, he is in a pumpkin costume. Now I've drawn, I think, Koji in a pumpkin before in the past, but to make sure that, I guess like to let you guys know, this is not completely random in my brain. Literally before October started, I ended up learning how to do crochet, and the reason being I wanted to learn it is that I wanted to make little pumpkin suits or like pumpkin outfits for my Masaki and Kaisen little stuffed plushies, but I ended up not learning how to do it properly and I got a little bit frustrated. So right now they're sitting in their individual like little flower pots, and I did not end up making a pumpkin. Who knows, maybe I'll do it tonight and see how far I can get. But I decided that maybe I'll just draw it, and because I don't think he's the type that would voluntarily place himself in a pumpkin, you guys can make your own scenarios on why he's in this, but I wanted him to spin. I don't know why, I just thought it'd be cute and a little bit more approachable to doing a stupid animation, I guess. I struggle with like being able to commit to doing a larger scale animation that requires like more frames and actually like trying to figure out the movements and stuff and consistency, blocking out colors, shadow, highlights and stuff, which in the future I would like to tackle, but I want to do that probably in Clip Studio Paint just because it'll give me a little bit more ease with all the shortcuts and everything that I'm used to when working on a digital program. So once I can get a little bit more confident with that, I will definitely do a video on it, and maybe we can do some fun things with my OCs with animations. But in terms of the progress for this, I ended up mapping out kind of like all of the frames that I wanted. So we have a front facing frame, then moving towards the left side, I have the free quarter, then we have the profile, like side profile, then we have the back 3/4, we have the back, and then we have the back 3/4 facing to the right, then we have the right side profile, and then we have 3/4 facing the front right side. Then we have the front again. So that's kind of like the little loop I had. Ended up doing the sketch. After that, make groups in my Procreate so that they can be their individual frames. Then we move on to the line work, which I showed you guys briefly, and then now we are filling in colors and adding any of the like details that I need to. So I ended up doing a screen or an ad layer, I believe. I think it's screen of kind of like the blue in his hair, and I used that for all of the highlights. And then for shading, I only shaded mostly his skin tone, and then for other colors, I ended up doing his eye color, but then everything else I think is left pretty simple. I did end up shading a little bit when I did the line art and blocking things out in black, like his sleeves, his pants, as well as some parts of his hair. But then after that, I changed the line colors for parts of like the pumpkin and his skin just to make it look a little bit softer, but still looked a little bit too flat in my opinion. So I decided to drop a quick shadow on the pumpkin itself so that we can have a little bit of volume. Put a drop shadow at the very bottom, and pretty much he is done. And is this one of the stupidest things I probably made? Probably, but you know, some things just don't exit my brain until I execute it. So yeah, here is little pumpkin Kaisen, and he's ready to spin. I have like a few other ideas I want to do, just like of stupid small animations like this. So both like in live 2D and probably in like some kind of art program that I will want to do individual animations. I will definitely tackle those in the future. But hopefully you guys enjoyed watching today's video, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye! Also, as always, please stay safe on Halloween.